Our next storyteller is a duo, Antoinette and Taylor Smith. Antoinette and Taylor Smith, who have been happily married for 49 years, are retired and living their best life in Hilo, Hawaii. Antoinette was born and raised on an Oahu sugar plantation in Waipahu, Hawaii, and Taylor was born and raised in the Cotton Belt town of Wharton, Texas. Taylor is a Vietnam-era U.S. Navy veteran, and he and Antoinette are both college graduates who earned their degrees while working and raising their family. Antoinette worked in retail sales and as an airline reservation specialist for Southwest Airlines, and Taylor worked in the petrochemical industry as an operations supervisor and in the electric utility industries as a safety director. Antoinette and Taylor lived and worked in Texas for 30 years before making Hilo their home in 2002. Antoinette and Taylor are blessed to have 3 handsome sons, 3 fabulous daughters-in-laws, and 5 grandchildren. For them, happiness is spending time with family and friends, storytelling, cooking, learning, teaching, traveling, movies, music, gardening, and more. Over the years, they have found that those are the things that rejuvenate their minds, bodies, and souls.
The 1967 Supreme Court decision on Loving versus Virginia made all United States anti-miscegenation laws unconstitutional. Until that point, 16 states, all in the South, had laws banning mixed-race marriages.
The following year, the Federal Fair Housing Act of 1968 prohibited discrimination concerning the sale, rental, and financing of housing based on race, religion, national origin, or sex, as passed quickly by the House of Representatives the day after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr.
Now, that landmark Supreme Court decision and federal legislation was a continued effort of our country trying to move towards a more just world. And 3 years after those landmark decisions, on February 19, 1971, I met Antoinette, or Tony, while I was stationed in Pearl Harbor in the U.S. Navy. And we dated for 4 months before I was transferred for tour duty in Vietnam. We were having so much fun spending time together in that short period of time. I didn't realize that I'd fallen in love with her until I left Hawaii. And there's a phrase that absence makes the heart grow fonder. And although it wasn't ideal, we continued to this long-distance love affair while I was in Saigon, by letters and by two-way radio, telephone, and whatever they would allow us to use there to try to communicate with family back home. After a few weeks apart, Tony accepted my proposal, and we married exactly 1 year from the date that we first met. In the spring of 1972, I was discharged from the Navy, and I returned to my hometown in Texas with my new bride from Waipahu, Hawaii. And since Tony had no idea what Texas was like, I proudly told her that we had beautiful beaches in Texas too. And from the first time we met, right? I told you that, right? Okay, I thought so. From the time that we met, I can honestly say that we never had any conversations about our skin color. Everything that we had done up to that time was just about our feelings for one another. We absolutely hadn't given any thought that Texas's anti-interracial marriage laws had been overturned just 5 years before that. But it didn't take long before we noticed that some people stared at us disapprovingly. Some made disparaging remarks as if we were breaking the law. And that's something we had never experienced while in Hawaii.
In late summer of 1972, we still considered ourselves newlyweds and were expecting our first child. Taylor was working in an evening shift at the nearby shipyard while taking day classes at the community college. I had no family or friends in Texas, and I had not forgiven him for comparing Texas beaches to Hawaii. My mother and sister came to visit, and he and I realized that it was time to find something more spacious than our tiny, cramped, one-bedroom apartment. especially since my mother would be returning in the fall to help me through the late period of my pregnancy. One evening, I called Taylor at work and told him that I had found a 2-bedroom house for rent advertised in our local newspaper for $100 a month. We agreed it may not be available if we waited until the following day when he was out of class and before going to work. He suggested that I should check it out that evening if possible, since I kept the car while he worked. I, along with my mother and sister, met the wife of the landlord, calling her Mrs. B, at her home. Mrs. B was a white female, friendly, and she gave me the keys and directions to the rent house to go and do a walkthrough because Mr. B wasn't available to do so. I noticed that the house was filthy inside, but I felt it was roomy and would be all right when cleaned. After all, the neighborhood looked safe, and it was closer to Taylor's job, school, my clinic, and the hospital. I gave Mrs. B the $100 deposit and the first month's rent with no utilities included.
Now, shortly after we moved in, we contacted the landlord to inform them that the back door would not lock, and that the back door was actually warped, and the lock set would not work. I also told them that the home heating unit was not working, and this was already, late fall. The landlord promised to repair both, but they never did come by to even check it out. So I purchased and installed a new back door and a new lock set because I needed to make sure that Tony was going to be safe when I worked the evening and the night shift. The landlord then allowed me to deduct the cost of that door from the next month's rent. They told me that they would have the heating unit repaired, but as of November 1st, no one ever showed up. So our baby arrived in November, and on December the 1st, around 7 a.m., Tony and I were awakened in the morning by some loud knocking at our front door. It was Mr. B, the landlord, and he was saying that he came by to collect the December rent, and he wanted to do that before he went in to work. So I let him inside the living room, and I went to go get our checkbook. And he walked over toward that heating unit. I just thought he's going to inspect it or whatever, and I sat down, and then he walked away and walked toward the kitchen. He took the liberty to walk toward the kitchen for some reason. And he said, I still don't have anybody that can fix that heating unit yet. So he walked toward the kitchen, but I didn't notice that he had turned down the hallway. Tony was still sleeping in the bed, and the baby was sleeping in the crib. I heard Mr. B talking, and when I stood up to go see and check out what he was talking about, he was coming out of the hallway back into the living room. I gave him the check, he gave me a receipt, and he left.
When Taylor came back into the bedroom, I told him that Mr. B walked into the bedroom and looked at me lying in bed. He said something to the effect of, "Y'all sure have fixed up the place." I was really disturbed at him doing that and walking into the room while I was asleep with the baby. But it was what it was. When the cold weather arrived, they still did not send anyone to repair the heater, so Taylor purchased a space heater and installed a gas supply line. The landlord said that he could not deduct the cost from our rent because they didn't authorize us to purchase it. Mr. B continued to collect the rent on the 1st of every month. He never came knocking at 7 a.m. anymore, but always after Taylor had gone to work or school. We always paid our rent on time and kept the maintenance up on the house and yard. When summer arrived, we decided to start looking into buying a home and maybe using Taylor's VA benefit. The landlord did not come by the first week in July to collect the rent for some reason. About the middle of July, after Taylor had gone to work, Mr. B came by to collect the rent. I gave him the check and he gave me a receipt. After that, he told me, by the way, I need my house back and I need y'all out in 2 weeks. I asked him, what are we supposed to do? Where are we going? He just responded, it wasn't his problem and that he needed the house because his daughter wanted to move in.
So we were not able to find another place within 2 weeks. So when Mr. B came by the first week of August to see if we were moving out, he said that, well, since we were still there, we owed him rent for August. I told him that I could not give him any money because I needed the money so that we can make a deposit on another place. So that same week, Mr. B had us served with an eviction notice. I had decided not to give him any money, and as we had found a house that we potentially would be able to afford, but I needed some money for the down payment and for moving expense. A coworker advised me to just go before the judge and see if I can get more time. So within a week, Mr. B and I appeared before a Galveston County justice. And I remember the judge explaining it to me. I didn't understand all the rules about the rent and contracts. And he asked me how much time did we need to be able to vacate the house. I explained that I was seriously looking to buy a starter home, but I needed at least another month to have the down payment. The judge then turned his attention to Mr. B and asked him if we had ever been late with the payment or anything that would cause him to only give us 2 weeks notice to move out of the house. Mr. B said, no, they always paid the rent, but his wife tricked me. The judge asked, what did he mean by that? And Mr. B said, well, when they rented the house, he sent his wife to look at the house. So they tricked us. My wife did not know that her husband was black, and I wouldn't have rented it to them if I knew that. So they tricked us. We've been getting calls from some of the good people who live on that street who are mad and upset with us because we were letting those people rent our house. Something to that effect. And he said some of them are good friends of ours, and we can understand that they're upset. But we tried to tell them that we were tricked into renting them our house. Well, after that, I remember the judge just kind of staring at Mr. B for quite a while. And it was really quiet in the courtroom. The judge then proceeded to chastise Mr. B and citing him the law about fair rent and things of that nature. The judge then informed me that I had 60 days to vacate the house and that I was not to pay Mr. B anything. The judge then slammed down his gavel and said, case dismissed. I was given some legal papers to sign. And we took full advantage of that 60 days rent-free. And we saved up the money, enough money for the down payment on this little house, and we was able to buy a few appliances to go along with that.
In reality, some people then and now may harbor negativity or judgment about an interracial marriage. Unfortunately, Taylor and I and our children experience difficulties at times by virtue of the fact that racism exists in our society on a deep level. And as a blended family, we continue to take on these issues together. 49 years later, we have proven to ourselves that love should have no bounds when confronted with injustice in a world that's striving to be just.